The ancient bell atop Oakhaven's weathered spire began its mournful, resonant toll, each clang vibrating through the cobblestone square and drawing the villagers from their morning routines. Children paused their games, shopkeepers emerged from their doorways, and farmers left their fields, all drawn by the somber summons. They gathered in a hushed semicircle before the grand oak doors of Abernathy Manor, their eyes fixed on the two figures standing stiffly on the threshold. Edmund, resplendent in a tailored silk waistcoat, his auburn hair styled impeccably, offered a wide, confident smile to the assembling crowd. He patted Casimir's shoulder, a gesture that seemed more for the onlookers than for his brother. Casimir, by contrast, stood with a quiet composure, his dark, homespun jacket blending into the shadow of the doorway, his gaze fixed on the worn leather briefcase clutched by Mr. Thorne, the village solicitor. His thoughtful eyes missed nothing, observing the subtle shifts in the villagers' expressions, the way the sunlight caught the dust motes dancing in the air. Mr. Thorne cleared his throat, his voice surprisingly clear, as he began to read the last will and testament of the late Mr. Abernathy. The air hung heavy with anticipation, punctuated only by the rustling of leaves in the nearby trees. Then came the pronouncement, "To my beloved sons, Edmund Abernathy and Casimir Abernathy, I bequeath, in equal measure, the entirety of my amassed fortune." At Thorne's signal, two burly estate workers emerged, straining under the weight of two identical heavy oak chests. With a resounding thud, they placed them side by side on the flagstones. Thorne unlatched the first, revealing a glittering cascade of gold coins that gleamed in the morning sun, casting a warm glow on Edmund's eager face. He repeated the action for the second chest, revealing an identical bounty. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Each brother had received a king's ransom. Edmund beamed, a triumphant glint in his eye. He imagined the grand parties, the lavish gifts, the adoration his newfound wealth would undoubtedly bring. Casimir merely nodded, his expression unreadable, though a faint flicker of concern touched his eyes as he surveyed the sheer volume of wealth before him. The villagers murmured, their whispers like a collective sigh. What would the Abernathy twins do with such a colossal inheritance? The question hung in the air, a silent challenge laid before them both. Edmund's grand display. The ink on the will was barely dry before Edmund Abernathy's grand display began. His first act, a thunderous declaration, was the acquisition of a magnificent stallion, a gleaming chestnut with a coat like polished mahogany and a mane that cascaded like spun gold. He named him Zephyr. Not content with mere speed, Edmund then commissioned a tailor from the nearest city, who arrived with bolts of shimmering silk and velvet, crafting waistcoats in emerald and sapphire, and trousers that fit with impeccable dash. He cut a truly arresting figure, astride Zephyr, as he galloped through Oakhaven, a whirlwind of color and movement. His generosity, though nascent, soon blossomed into a weekly spectacle. Every Saturday, the Abernathy estate, once a quiet, dignified presence, erupted in a symphony of joyous sound. Fiddles wailed, flutes trilled, and laughter spilled from the open windows, mingling with the scent of roasting meats and sweet wines. Villagers, initially hesitant, soon flocked to Edmund's gatherings, their faces alight with wonder as he pressed silver coins into the hands of musicians and offered endless refills of the finest ale. "To good cheer!" he'd bellow, his voice booming over the din, raising a crystal goblet. But these were mere preludes to his grandest undertaking. Within weeks, the quiet hum of construction began, escalating to a clamor that echoed through the valley. Edmund was building a house. No, not a house, but a veritable palace. It was a sprawling, multi-winged mansion adorned with ornate gables and towering chimneys, its gardens designed to bloom with exotic flora that had never graced Oakhaven's soil. The sheer audacity of it left tongues wagging, eyes wide with astonishment. "He lives like a king," muttered old Mrs. Gable, watching the flurry of activity from her cottage window, a faint smile playing on her lips. Others nodded, their admiration clear. Edmund Abernathy, the talk of Oakhaven, was not merely spending money, he was weaving a vibrant tapestry of dreams, and for now, the villagers were captivated by every glistening thread. Casimir's quiet ways. Casimir's inheritance, a weighty pouch of gold coins, felt like a secret he could barely contain. Under the cloak of a moonless night, the only sounds were the rustle of dry leaves and his own measured breathing. He dug a shallow grave beneath the gnarled roots of the old oak at the edge of his property, the soil cool and damp against his calloused hands. The strong box, heavy with its golden cargo, thudded softly into its resting place. He patted the earth back into submission, smoothing out the disturbance until it looked undisturbed. This was not a treasure to flaunt, but a seed to nurture. His days unfolded with a quiet rhythm. Breakfast was often a bowl of oats, sometimes sweetened with a dab of honey from the wild bees he'd observed. Lunch was usually a hunk of dark bread and whatever root vegetables his small, meticulously tended garden yielded. His trousers were patched, his shirt threadbare, but always clean. He moved through his small cottage with a deliberate grace, each action purposeful. Most afternoons found him with his nose buried in a book, borrowed from a traveling merchant or a worn volume passed down from his grandfather. He devoured texts on soil composition, the grafting of fruit trees, and the intricate weaving patterns for wool. The pages smelled of dust and forgotten spices, their wisdom absorbed with a learner's hunger. He started sketching designs for a small apple orchard and researching the local sheep population, his mind alight with possibilities. The villagers barely registered Casimir. When they did, it was usually with a dismissive glance or a mumbled observation. "Odd fellow," Casimir Abernathy, Old Man Hemlock would declare, spitting tobacco juice. Never a word, always puttering about with his dirt and his books. The children, less charitable, sometimes pointed and whispered about his quiet ways, his unadorned life, a stark contrast to the boisterous displays of others. Casimir, however, remained impervious to their judgments, his gaze fixed on a distant, greener horizon. He was building something, not just with his hands, but with his patience and his mind. The empty chest. The clinking of crystal glasses and the boisterous laughter from Abernathy Manor now echoed almost nightly across Oakhaven. Edmund, ever the magnanimous host, had outdone himself again. This week's spectacle involved a troupe of acrobats tumbling beneath a canopy of strung lanterns while a roasted ox rotated slowly over a crackling fire, its savory aroma weaving through the cool evening air. He handed out silver coins like candy to every child who dared approach, his smile wide and genuine. "No one in Oakhaven shall ever want for anything, not while Edmund Abernathy still breathes," he boomed, raising a goblet of spiced wine. The villagers, dazzled by his endless largesse, cheered his name with fervent adoration. His palace, though still incomplete, boasted new turrets and a sprawling conservatory, each addition a testament to his seemingly bottomless fortune. Then the sky turned a bruised purple. A storm, unlike any Oakhaven had seen in decades, descended with a furious roar. Winds shrieked through the valley, tearing at roofs and uprooting ancient trees. Rain fell in sheets, transforming the placid river into a raging torrent. Homes were deluged, barns flattened, and the village's main bridge crumbled into the churning water. Panic gripped the villagers. Edmund, surveying the devastation from his grand balcony, felt a surge of heroic purpose. "Fear not, my friends," he shouted above the tempest's dying wails, his voice hoarse but resolute. "I will rebuild Oakhaven. Every plank, every nail, every lost belonging shall be replaced." He flung open his doors, declaring his estate a refuge, and then, with an almost frantic energy, began dispatching orders. Carpenters were hired at exorbitant rates, merchants paid double for building materials, and food was bought in bulk. He personally directed the reconstruction of the bridge, pushing exhausted laborers with promises of more gold. Days later, with the worst of the damage repaired and Oakhaven slowly recovering, Edmund returned to his study. The grand oak chest, once overflowing with gold and silver, sat before him. He lifted the heavy lid, the familiar creak echoing in the sudden silence. Inside, nestled among a few stray dust motes, was nothing but a single, tarnished copper coin. The chest was utterly, completely empty. Dust and whispers. Edmund ran a trembling hand through his already disheveled hair, the ledger open before him, its columns of figures swimming. The usual boisterous laughter that once echoed through his grand hall had been replaced by a gnawing silence, broken only by the frantic scratching of his pen. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, despite the chill seeping from the grand, unlit fireplace. His eyes, once bright with the thrill of acquisition, now held a haunted, distant look. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of sunlight piercing the grimy windows, illuminating the forgotten corners of what was once the talk of the county. Cobwebs, like delicate gray lace, adorned the chandeliers that once glittered with 1,000 candles. A thick layer of grit coated the polished mahogany tables where champagne flutes once clinked, and the velvet drapes hung limp and faded, smelling faintly of neglect. The grand piano, usually the centerpiece of lively soirees, stood silent, a spectral sentinel. The last guest had departed weeks ago, and no new invitations had been dispatched. The gates, once flung wide in welcome, now remained mostly shut, the ironwork dull and unpolished. The vibrant sounds of music and revelry, the clinking of glasses, the joyous chatter, all had evaporated, leaving behind an unsettling void. In the village, the whispers had begun. At the market stalls, over steaming cups of ale, and by the communal well, Edmund's name was uttered with a new inflection. Lost it all, they say. The palace is nothing but a shell. Children, once eager to glimpse the flamboyant lord, now skirted wide around the Abernathy estate, their parents pulling them closer. The admiration had curdled into a mixture of pity and a cruel sort of satisfaction. Edmund, once the star of their provincial lives, was now merely a cautionary tale, a ghost haunting his own crumbling dream. Casimir's steady growth. The seasons turned, painting the valley in hues of green and then gold. Casimir, ever the quiet observer, watched his apple saplings transform. What began as slender sticks now stood as sturdy trees, their branches laden with crimson fruit. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of ripe apples, a testament to his patient tending. Each basket he filled and sold at the market added a small, steady stream to his coffers, far from the grand sums Edmund chased, but undeniably his own. His hands, calloused from orchard work, found a different rhythm in the evenings. The rhythmic thrum of the loom filled his small cottage as he wove wool into blankets. He didn't rush, ensuring each thread was tight, each edge finished with care. Villagers, initially skeptical of his homespun wares, soon sought out Casimir's blankets. Their reputation for exceptional warmth and surprising softness spread, a quiet buzz through the community. Women huddled under them during the bitter winters, marveling at their lasting quality. With each successful harvest and every blanket sold, Casimir bought more acreage beyond his initial plot, fertile ground for expanding his orchards. More raw wool sourced from the finest local flocks. His strongbox, once a light presence under his bed, grew noticeably heavier with each passing month. The glint of gold coins, earned through honest labor and thoughtful investment, was a silent affirmation of his chosen path. Yet his lifestyle remained unchanged. His meals were simple, his clothes practical, and his cottage, while tidy, lacked any hint of extravagance. He measured his wealth not in displays but in the quiet security it offered, a bulwark against the uncertainties of the world. A lonely end. A persistent cough had taken root in Edmund's chest, a rasping bark that shook his gaunt frame. The last of his coin had vanished on a final, desperate bottle of cheap wine, leaving nothing for a physician. His grand palace, once a beacon of revelry, now echoed with a chilling emptiness. The servants, unpaid for weeks, had long since departed, taking with them the last vestiges of its former glory. Edmund shivered beneath a threadbare blanket, the cold biting through the vast, unheated rooms. Hunger, a gnawing beast, had become his constant companion. He dreamt of the roasted game and candied fruits that once graced his overflowing tables, waking to the bitter reality of an empty larder. A scrounged, stale crust of bread was a rare luxury now, often chased down with sips of muddy water from the well. The villagers, once so eager to bask in his reflected glow, now cast pitying glances from a safe distance. Old Martha from the bakery occasionally left a small, hardened loaf by his gate, her eyes heavy with sorrow, but no one dared venture inside the skeletal remains of his once resplendent home. The whispers followed him even into his delirium. Poor Edmund, such a waste, how quickly it all vanished. One frigid morning, the silence in the grand house was absolute, broken only by the mournful creak of an ill-fitting shutter. Edmund lay still in his cavernous bed, a wisp of breath the last of his extravagant life. The last flicker of the grand Abernathy name had extinguished, leaving behind only the cold, still air and the fading scent of forgotten opulence. His grand palace, a testament to fleeting ambition, now stood as his lonely tomb, the wisdom of Oakhaven. Years later, the gnarled hands that once tilled a small plot now tended vast orchards, their branches heavy with fruit. Casimir Abernathy, his back a permanent curve from decades of quiet labor, still lived in the modest cottage, its hearth often bearing the scent of drying herbs. He moved with a deliberate slowness, each step a testament to patience. His eyes, though clouded with age, missed nothing in the vibrant tapestry of his land. His wealth was not in gold coin, though he had plenty, but in the deep roots of his trees and the rich soil beneath them. Then a creeping shadow fell upon Oakhaven. A blight, insidious and swift, began to wither the apple trees across the entire valley. Leaves curled into brittle husks and promising green fruits shriveled on their stems. Panic rippled through the village. This was more than a bad season, it was an existential threat. The annual harvest, the lifeblood of their community, was doomed. Villagers, desperate, tried their usual remedies, wood ash, prayers, even old wives' tales. Nothing worked. The blight marched on, relentless. One crisp autumn morning, a delegation, their faces etched with despair, arrived at Casimir's door. He listened patiently, his gaze fixed on the distant, wilting orchards. "The soil," he murmured, "it's exhausted, and the air too humid." He brought out aged, leather-bound journals, filled with observations spanning half a century. His solutions weren't quick fixes, but a meticulous blend of remedies learned through quiet study and endless experimentation. A precise fungal spray derived from specific wild mushrooms, a deep root aeration technique, and a specific calcium-rich compost blend. Skeptical but out of options, they followed his instructions. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, miraculously, the blight began to recede. New growth, tentative at first, then robust, emerged. The harvest, though diminished, was saved. The villagers, once quick to dismiss him as merely eccentric, looked at Casimir with new eyes. His quiet wisdom, accumulated through patient observation and humble learning, had saved them all. There was no fanfare, no grand pronouncements, just the deep, abiding respect that settled around him, a stark contrast to the fleeting admiration once showered upon Edmund. They understood, finally, the profound difference between show and substance. A lasting legacy, Casimir Abernathy, even with silver hair and a stoop to his shoulders, was often found among his apple trees, not merely supervising, but pruning with a practiced hand, or studying a new grafting technique from a worn agricultural journal. His mind, sharp as ever, sought knowledge with the same quiet determination he'd applied to every aspect of his life. He funded Oakhaven's first public library, ensuring others had the resources he'd often lacked in his youth. His wealth, substantial and undeniable, was never flaunted. It was woven into the fabric of the community, improving roads, funding schools, and ensuring the health of the very orchards that had built his fortune. One crisp autumn morning, as the first rays of sun gilded the leaves of his oldest apple trees, Casimir passed peacefully in his sleep. The news spread through Oakhaven like the scent of wood smoke settling into every home. He was remembered not just as a wealthy man, but as Oakhaven's wealthiest man, a title that carried a weight of respect far beyond mere financial standing. His funeral was attended by nearly every soul in the valley, a testament to the quiet impact he'd made. For generations after, the tale of the Abernathy brothers became a cornerstone of Oakhaven folklore, whispered around hearths and recounted in schoolhouses. Children learned of Edmund, the dashing brother who arrived in town with a flourish, his pockets overflowing, only to leave nothing but debts and a quickly forgotten memory. And then there was Casimir, the steady brother whose initial quiet industry blossomed into an enduring testament to patience and wisdom. The lesson was etched into Oakhaven's very soul. True prosperity wasn't a sudden blaze, but a slow, steady burn. Edmund's fleeting extravagance was a warning, while Casimir's lasting legacy of hard work, continuous learning, and thoughtful investment stood as a beacon. His orchards continued to thrive, bearing fruit that nourished the community, a tangible reminder that genuine wealth was built not on show but on substance and sustained effort.